Welcome to Improving Parking Operations with Automatic License Plate Recognition. This is the first webinar in a series over the summer that we'll be hosting. Just to start us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the webinar logistics. So basically, everyone during the session will be muted just because of the sheer magnitude of attendees. We want to make sure that this operates smoothly. You'll have opportunities to ask questions throughout, and we will be answering questions at the end. If you have a question during the webinar, please just go ahead and type it into the questions box on the GoToWebinar interface on your right-hand side. You can submit those at any time. We may get to respond to a few of them in writing during the webinar, but most likely we'll be getting to those at the end, and we'll answer most of them verbally. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to introduce our speaker for today. Chris Yiggett is joining us on the line. Chris is the program manager for AutoView. He's been working with AutoView since April of 2010 and has worked in a variety of functions with the AutoView product line and developing new and exciting features for the parking markets as well as the law enforcement markets. So I'm going to hand the line over to Chris so he can begin the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Charles, for that nice introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear us well and see the slides. If at all, at any point, you feel you've lost audio or can't see the video, by all means, please send us a little comment, and at least we'll be able to react, and hopefully we won't advance too much. So again, thank you everybody for joining. The goal today is really to kind of review a little bit about some LPR applications and how they hopefully are relevant to your parking operations. So some of the points we hope to cover today is the challenges for today's parking authorities. That sounds a little arrogant, so I'm going to kind of maybe put a spin on it. It's the challenges that we perceive when we visit our customers and deal with our customers on a daily basis. We literally have hundreds of parking authorities and colleges and different types of customers, and this is the feedback we often get. So that's the idea of putting it in there. Obviously, there might be more things that are important to you that may not be on this list. So we're going to talk a little bit about how ALPR works, and I know for many of you, you already have an ALPR system. Some of you maybe haven't crossed that line yet, so we're going to take a second to give a very high-level overview of how that works for both mobile and fixed. We're going to talk about connecting the first and the second point. So how can ALPR help you with some of the initiatives and the challenges you have today? Within those challenges, we're going to talk a little bit more about increasing compliance, although that falls into the third category. We think it's important enough that it deserves a spot on its own. And of course, we're going to leave plenty of time for some Q&A. As Charles mentioned, you can ask questions along the way, but we will have some a whole section at the end, and if we have to go over time a little bit, we can do that as well in terms of questions and answers. All right, so what are some of the challenges that that we come across very often that we believe apply to many of you who are joining us today? A few years back, we surveyed over 700 parking professionals, and we conducted this survey, and we pulled out what I think is some interesting statistics. So one of the questions we asked was, and again, these are 700 of your peers, parking professionals, what they believed was the estimated violation rate. So whether it's a college campus or a parking authority of a municipality or a city, this was the feedback we got. So it's pretty diverse. I'll give you a bit of time to digest that. I think one of the key takeaways from this pie chart is essentially approximately a third of people believed that there was over 20% violators in, so 1 out of every 5 cars potentially was in violation or hasn't been respecting the parking ordinances. Another thing that we asked as a follow-up was, out of those violators, what is your estimated capture rate? Like how many of these, people who aren't respecting the parking bylaws and whatnot, are we actually getting to? So I think that one's a little bit more interesting. So it's kind of a split pie, but for me, the key takeaway is over 50% of parking managers believe they are capturing less than 25% of the violators. And if we further narrow that down, over 35% are believe they're capturing less than 10%. I thought that was very astonishing. To me, that's it's crazy. Like, this is what we do, folks, and this is, to me, this is like a sad statistic, unfortunately. But it is what it is, and again, this is based on a survey. So some of the other challenges I believe we're coming across more and more is people, based on the feedback of the community or whether it's students on campus, people are traveling more, they're getting exposed to better and better parking systems and certainly more convenient parking systems. And people want to move away from some of the more traditional methods. The single head meter that you see there is a classic. It's been around forever. It works very well. They're reliable, but I think what people often associate with it is it's not the most convenient. People want to move away from that. They don't want to necessarily fiddle around for change. If they have change, that's becoming something that's not as common maybe as it was before. If you're in the middle of a transaction at a merchant, you have to run back out and feed the meter. If you're at a restaurant, so on and so forth. So I think people are starting to move away from that. And more citizens and users are looking for that convenience. And to me, the ultimate goal of where everybody wants to go is a reflection on where we are today in society. Is everybody wants to pay by phone, whether it's using your phone, your Apple account, whatever it is, e-wallet. This is where people want to go. And to me, this is something that a lot of our customers are looking towards moving. Constrained resources. I'd love to say that, hey, all of our parking customers have unlimited budgets. I wish that were the case, but the reality is some of us might have very, very large budgets that aren't questioned, but most of us have to deal with something that's a little bit closer to reality. That's not to say that we're being starved. That may be the case for some of us. The reality is there are budgets that need to be respected, and more people are asking us to do more. One of the things I hear very often is that headcounts are frozen. Sometimes I've definitely heard people say, hey, we can apply to get some technology, we can apply to get some tools, some software. Those doors are open, but if we're looking at increasing headcount, that's often locked. I hear that often, and I hear it probably more often on the municipal level. People have to do more with less. Whether it's getting a handheld now that can double as a communication tool, using software that's more powerful that can do more than one thing, we're looking for tools to help us do more with less. This is one that's very interesting. I dealt with I was educated by one of our customers on the East Coast. They had moved to virtual permits and pay by plate and done a wonderful job. And I thought it was one of the greatest installations. And when I spoke to them, they were very happy. But one of the things they told me was their single biggest, the thing they enjoyed the most, the biggest benefit I would say they perceived was not so much that, everything was virtual now and flawless or compliance had gone up. They were saying how one of the most difficult tasks they had was once a year they had to deal with permit renewal, and as they described it to me, the line would go from the desk out the door, down the stairs, and halfway around the block, because people would show up once a year to renew their permits, and it was a nightmare. And then they had to plan for this weeks in advance, and it was extremely stressful for the staff that was there. And calling in sick at that time was a no-no, because it was a very trying time. And they did away with all of that. So it's not necessarily about the stats and the revenue and the compliance. Sometimes there's other key benefits, and very often this will either free up staff or place less stress on the existing staff. Another one is looking for force multipliers. Very similar to doing more with less, but this is really, how do you take the same officers and make it seem like you have more officers? Whether it's in this case, there's someone on a Segway, but can we give our team, our staff, tools that can actually enable them to make 2 officers seem like 4, or so on and so forth. We're going to go through a very brief, virtual demo of how ALPR works. And again, I apologize for those of you who are very familiar with it, but we're just going to do it very quickly to give a kind of a summary. Here's a picture of a vehicle that's being used for ALPR. You can see the little white cameras on top. If I hover my mouse over it, you can kind of see them. They're right there. And essentially, this car drives around, and what we're going to do now is kind of simulate a parking area where the rule is there's a 4-hour time limit, and you can only park there for 4 hours, so it's a time limit, unless you have a permit. If you have Zone M permit, you can stay there all day, and that's the scenario we're going to run through. There are different scenarios, of course, but that's the one I think that kind of exposes everything. So our car comes, scans the first car. We see that this guy has a permit, so we just move along. Now, in this scenario, I'm stopping at every car, but that's not realistic. You would just drive through, of course, and all this happens in real time. I'm just stopping for the purposes of the demo. So now I've scanned the gray car. I see that the gray car does not have a permit. Now that the gray car does not have a permit, am I ready to ticket it? The answer is no, because I'm technically in a 4-hour zone. So what I do is I make sure I record the GPS coordinates, I record the images of the wheel for additional data if that's an option that's interesting to you. But essentially what this acts as is chalk. So I'm chalking the vehicle, but again, this is happening at very high speeds as you're driving through the city or the community or the campus, whatever the case might be. So I don't give this guy a ticket, I go to the next vehicle. I scan this, he doesn't have a permit, but wait a minute. At this point, the system is telling me we've already chalked this vehicle in the same position, but before I give him a ticket, it is possible that since I last chalked him, he acquired a permit or somehow got permission or paid for some extra time. So in real time, the vehicle is actually going to do some lookup. It's going to communicate with the permitting provider, the pay station provider, the pay by phone provider. And once he confirms that, no, this person has not, in fact, paid for the parking rights, then we can issue him a ticket. Move on to the next one. This guy has a permit, but hold on a second. Regardless of the fact that he's parked properly, he's paid for his parking rights, we detect that he's a scofflaw. And that's one of the interesting aspects of using ALPR, regardless of whether or not you're intentionally looking for scofflaws. You could turn on a switch and we're looking for scofflaws in the background without you even knowing. And of course, all of this information is sent wirelessly to the background. So the reads, the infractions, GPS position, all this data is sent live. And that could be an interesting scenario for a few reasons. As a manager, and you want to know what's going on with the staff and how the day's going, you can monitor all that live. And of course, if the jerk in the red convertible comes to the office claiming that he was not parked for over 2 hours or 4 hours, whatever the case might be, you can simply flip the screen around and say, actually, sir, look here, this is a picture of you at 12:30, this is a picture of you at 5:30. Clearly, you were there for longer, and very often that the ample evidence is often enough to dissuade the situation from escalating. Take a quick look at fixed ALPR. So the idea here is that we place cameras, whether it's on the side of a building, inside a parking structure. It doesn't really matter. It could be on a pole. The idea is we're monitoring all cars coming in and out of a lot. All right, so if you're a campus and you have 15 cars, 15 surface lots, you can have a camera at the entrance and exit of each one, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those advantages. So the way this works, and I'll talk about the chronology of the way this solution works for fixed anyways, is essentially a car comes in. Regardless of where he comes in, because we are able to scan the vehicle coming in, we could tell you which car came in, when he came in, and from where he came in. And of course, the same thing applies to exits. So essentially, it's like you're observing all your ingress and exit points. So he comes in and we allocate what we call convenience time. Now, this is not mandatory. It's not something we typically advertise, but you can configure this to be 0 if you want. But essentially, we typically recommend our customers give like a 15 to 20 minute, I don't want to call it a grace period because that's something different, but we're going to give them time because it's possible the person's coming and visiting your campus, for example, for the first time, or this structure for the first time. He doesn't know how to pay yet. He has to download an application. He's not that familiar with the pay station. Whatever the case might be, we'll give him like 15, 20 minutes to just kind of figure out the system and give him a chance to pay for parking. It could also be the guy came in by accident, needs to do a U-turn and goes right back out. In either way, in either case, the 15 minutes usually covers that period. So that's what the convenience time is done. Once the convenience time is done, at that point, he needs to pay for parking, and he can purchase an hour, 2 hours, whatever the amount he decides he's going to stay, per policy of the location, of course. And if he pays for 2 hours, he's set for 2 hours, and we won't give it a second thought. Now, once that time is done, then we allocate a grace period. And again, this is entirely configurable, but the idea is if I'm at a mall and I've paid till 3 o'clock and I get back to my car at 2:59, I still need a little bit of time to load my groceries, get in the car, drive to the exit. There might be a few cars waiting at the exit. So all this to say, it kind of makes sense to give a little bit of grace period. Again, this is not something you necessarily have to advertise. It could be 15 minutes so people don't count on it. But again, it helps buffer the system to take care of some edge cases. Once that's done, and if you still haven't paid or if your time's up, then you're definitely in violation. So your grace period is ended. You're now added to a list of parking violators, and at this point there's a few options. You have parking enforcement officers that could go out hunting with a list of vehicles. They can have a tablet with them so they can see that list in real time, or you can push that list of violators to an LPR vehicle, which will scan the lot and it'll be like shooting fish in a barrel, if you pardon the expression, but essentially because you know who you're looking for before you even get there. So again, that's how the enforcement is done. And then at the end of the day, that vehicle leaves and there's a tracking, there's a record of him leaving. The fact that we know who's coming, when they're coming, and from where they're coming, and the same thing of who's going, when they're going, and from where they've left. This also allows us to track occupancy of the lots in real time. Okay, so what role can ALPR play in some of these initiatives that we talked about? First of all, when we talk about the convenience of the payment options, virtual permits are very interesting. And for those of you who haven't heard of the concept, essentially what that means is you're no longer paying cash or taking a receipt. Your permit is your license plate, and it's virtually managed by a system. The beauty of this is you get to use that phone that everybody wants to use to pay, if that's an option. If you don't want to pay by phone, you can still pay using cash or credit card at a pay station. For those of us who haven't yet adopted the phone or the e-wallet, as they call it. And if you're dealing with a permit provider, again, very often there's websites and stuff you could deal with. You don't physically need that hang tag. You may want to hang on to it for a while to transition people from it, but we do see people moving away from the hang tag completely. And the nice part about it is there are countless integrations that we've done, more than can possibly fit on the screen anyways. But pretty much whatever the payment provider, permit management company you choose, pay station company, the integrations, at least with Genetec, they're all done already. You don't have to worry about someone writing something. These are all tried, tested, and true. I apologize for any of the ones I left off the list. Like I said, they don't all fit on one slide. Hopefully I won't get too many calls after this saying, how come you didn't include my logo on the slide? Another advantage of this, I think, are flexible and potentially new parking rules. Again, we're talking about convenience. You might have a special event on campus, okay? So the big game this Sunday, all permit holders can park anywhere on campus. This is a decision you could make, and then, you know, it's a couple of clicks of a button away, and all of this gets pushed to the ALPR system. Whether it's fixed or mobile, all these rules can just be turned on or off on the flick of a switch. It might be the opposite. You might say, hey, you know, there's a big game this Sunday. Anybody who has a regular permit, be it staff or students, should not be parking in lot F or something along those lines. And again, along the same thought process of, you know, making changes, you may have a very complex set of rules. You might say, hey, part-time permit holders can park in lots A, C, F, and R, but not before 3 p.m., sorry, and not on weekends or Wednesdays. This would seem like a complex rule. If you hire a new parking agent, it might take him a while before he gets the hang of it. But these are rules that can be made up on a dime and pushed to the vehicles or pushed to the fixed cameras instantly, and the rules just become alive. So again, the fact that it's virtual permits and they can be dynamically changed is a strong advantage. You may have something that's unplanned. You might have some, you know, a water main burst under the parking lot, and there's some emergency repairs that need to be done. Contractors are coming down. You could shut down a lot, put a sign that says, hey, everybody that's in the faculty lot, you're going to have to park in lot B today. And again, make that change virtually, and then there's no need to necessarily change your enforcement pattern. Once you go in, the rules can be sent live to the ALPR system. A new green initiative we're seeing more and more on campuses. This has been around for a while, essentially carpooling, and we see it a lot on campuses, but more and more and more we're seeing it on municipalities. In fact, we've recently made some adjustments, and the idea is, as opposed to giving you know, a group of 6 car holders 6 different permits and somehow trying to figure out if they've ever been in the city at the same time or if they've ever been cheating and been on campus at the same time, again, ALPR can do that. The permits can be virtual. All of this can be, you know, usually done through an app or online, depending who your permit provider is. Push down to the vehicle, and you can essentially have one or multiple cars scanning your campus, scanning your city, and if these vehicles are seen at the same time within the city, it's flagged as a shared permit violation. Dynamic permits for guests and special events. We see this a lot. You know, once a year, the parents are encouraged to come down and visit their kids at the on campus and see what's going on. They can have a website where they register, and all these permits, all these license plates basically get pushed, and you can say, well, it's good for the next 24 hours, or it's good for the weekend. Again, very dynamic changes to special events without having to print out physical permits. You may have contractors on site for a week or 2 weeks. Again, they don't need a paper permit. If they register their license plates, they can actually get the work, their permits, their virtual permits done before they show up. They become active on the Monday, and they go dry on the Friday or whatever it is that you choose to make happen. You may be hosting a seminar on parking. You may have the AutoView folks on your campus giving a great presentation about license plate enabled parking, and you have people showing up for the day. Again, instead of going through the system and issuing permits, you might just come up with an Excel spreadsheet with like 12 license plates, put them in the system, and instantly they become available for parking. Here's one that not a lot of people are aware of, but essentially all the LPR cameras that we have can also be doubled as a video camera on the same system. So you don't necessarily have to go out and get yourself another video management system. The Genetec Security Center, which handles your license plate recognition requirements, at the same time, the same system can be used for video surveillance. So essentially, all of your video, your LPR, ALPR cameras can be doubled as security cameras, which brings a lot when you're talking about either surface lots or a parking structure. And also, you can add additional video-only cameras, not necessarily ALPR cameras. You might have some basic either Axis, Panasonic, Sony cameras that you want to add. And again, these can all be brought in on the exact same system. And I think in today's day and age, more and more people appreciate these things more when it comes to parking structures, whether it's, for the feeling of safety when you're walking in at night, and even though it's well lit, having a camera or these signs does, I think, lend to a more secure environment. Taking away gates in favor of free flow. Again, anyone who visits you, whether it's your hospital, whether it's a courthouse, the first thing and the last thing they will experience is the parking. And if you show up and the first thing you see is gates, it's not necessarily the most welcoming thing you can have. Now, the idea is really, can we do away with gates and replace them with ALPR cameras? I believe there's certain applications where this, quite frankly, does not make any sense. If you're at an airport, for example, I think it's going to be a long time before we do away with gates at an airport when you're charging $35 a day for parking. However, if you're on a campus where it's the same clientele coming over and over, parking for a day may only cost a few bucks versus $35 a day. This may make sense. And when we started down this path a few years ago, a lot of people were screaming it was the end of the world, you can't do away with gates. But what we found is there's many applications where it does make a lot of sense. I'm going to dig in a little bit more into how we would enforce this a little bit later, but it is a very viable concept that we're seeing more and more. This is probably one of the the fastest growing markets that we've seen here at Genetec in a while. Increasing compliance. All right, so one of the big things that we've said a lot, and this varies. Some people might say, well, it's not 5, I definitely see 9, and some people say, I definitely don't see 9, it's more like 5. But from all our studies and the customers that we've studied over the last many years, and there are quite a few of them, what we see is that an officer in an ALPR vehicle will typically cover 5 to 9 times more ground than an officer on foot. That's the statistics we have. It depends on whether or not it's overtime. It depends on whether or not it's permit, how close your lots are, how many cars per lot. So there's a lot of factors that play in there. But it is definitely a force multiplier in terms of gain of how much ground you can cover. Keep in mind, there's a video somewhere on the internet if you guys are so interested. You could look it up. But basically, there's a car driving 200 miles an hour, reading license plates with an ALPR reader. I don't recommend you drive 200 miles an hour in the parking lot, of course, but the idea is that it really doesn't compare to an officer on foot. You can drive at pretty much any speed you want in the parking lot and expect to capture the vast majority of the plates. The impact of ALPR in cities. So this is a trend that at least I used to think was very interesting. If that yellow line were to represent the average revenue that a city or actually it's a city would gain from issuing tickets, once you bring in ALPR, the curve changes. So the blue curve is what we would expect to see once you introduce ALPR. And you'll see actually initially the revenue is lower than what you were used to before. And the reason for that is the officers, the whole team, the process, the system is new. I think it takes time to get used to it. You may have had someone writing tickets by hand the day before, and all of a sudden, he's in this stunning car, and he's driving around, and he hasn't really fully grasped the system. So it takes a little bit of time to ramp up. But once that person ramps up, there's a significant gain in revenue and the amount of tickets being given out. But what we see in a city is that actually drops off a little bit. And what happens here is word gets around. People start talking, citizens talk, whatever it is, word gets around that, hey man, I've been parking for 2 years, I never paid for parking, and all of a sudden I've gotten 2 tickets in the last 2 weeks. So people realize that the effective enforcement is here upon them, and they start to change their ways. And this is ultimately what we want, right? We want people to comply with the law. We're not just here to give out tickets, but we want people to follow the rules so there's plenty of parking for everybody. But what's interesting here is that you actually settle at a line that's above what it was before. And the reason you're still able to gain more revenue, even though compliance has fallen into place, is because that's the 5 to 9 times factor. You're still covering much, much more with the same amount of power. So that gap is there. You're still making more than before, but compliance is actually increasing. Here's something that's interesting. So if I show that graph again, if you compare it to what a university would see, we've actually seen something different. So the orange line represents the university. So again, you start off lower than you were before. There's a ramp up. The difference is, though, there's no drop. Okay, and this was initially very puzzling, and as one of our good university customers educated me, I was trying to understand why that drop didn't occur. And she said to me, she says, Chris, I get fresh fish every semester, and they all think they could beat the system. So essentially, there's a big turnover in your parkers, and the word that did get around eventually graduates, and there's a new bunch of people that show up, or as she affectionately referred to it as fish. So that gap that you lost at the city level is not necessarily lost at the university level. All right, so how can we use ALPR for guided enforcement? Now, if I'm talking about the fixed application, let's assume this was your campus, and your campus, it could be a hospital, whatever it is, maybe even a city. You have 4 off-street lots, A, B, C, and D. How do you determine where you're going to send your parking enforcement officer at any given time? I've seen it all from, we're going to do it in alphabetical order, to a quote-unquote random schedule that's predetermined. I've seen people do it by month, and then the lot that's closest to the letter of the month. I've essentially seen it all, and the reality is there's no wrong answer, because how do you do it? You may have some parking agents that have a gut feeling that, there's a concert tonight, so I have a feeling that lot D is going to be a great place to be efficient, and so on and so forth. But if you had Freefall, or if you had ALPR monitoring all of those lots tied into your parking providers, well, you can then in real time know where you will find the most violations. In this case, we can see that lot D has the most violations. So this is an interesting aspect. So now you have the ability to guide your enforcement officers if you don't have a bunch of them. If you only have 1 or 2, you know where to send them to be the most effective. Again, referring to that survey that we talked about before, over 40% of off-street managers surveyed said that they don't track occupancy. Most of them wanted to, but they didn't have the means to do it. The nice part about the solution is you can also monitor in real time the occupancy level of each of the lots. Now, if I have my violation rate and I have my occupancy rate, I can also calculate my compliance in real time. So if I then send my officers out and give out my citations, I can also calculate my enforcement rate in real time. So you end up getting a lot of very interesting data as a parking manager on how your lots are doing. And if you do this week after week, month after month, you can now track the trends. You can realize that, hey, we're actually lot D is not as bad as it was because it's getting better. Yet lot D is the one that the enforcement rate is going down, and so on and so forth. So you could pull out some interesting data based on those statistics. Here's an example. Here's an example of what I think is a very cool way to monitor a lot. This is a parking structure with 5 different levels, and each level is controlled by LPR. And then in real time, not only can you monitor the occupancy of every level, you can also know how many people are in violation at every level. Again, this is one way to look at a solution. This could be your desktop, actually. Here's another a way that perhaps a municipality might measure some of their off-street lots. You can actually have a physical camera on every lot monitoring, so you can see live what's going on in every lot. And then if you notice in the picture, there's actually a bar at the top of every lot. And the bar can tell you the occupancy, each lot, so you know how crowded each one is, and how many parking violations are live on any given lot. And again, all of this happens in real time while you're looking at a map and at the video. Another one that I like to look at, here we have a case where we have a nested lot within a larger lot at a company. So the executives should be going in on the right and everybody else should be going straight ahead. And if you look at this, again, you can monitor the whole thing live through video. You can monitor occupancy live, and you can monitor if anybody's coming in there who shouldn't be there, either doesn't have a permit or doesn't have the permission as a visitor or as a guest. This is great for not only doing real-time monitoring enforcement, but it also has a security angle, which can be very interesting as well. And by the way, the last few pictures that we just showed are different aspects of what the security center, the back end of AutoView can look like. They're just configured differently. You can also gather metrics on your parking. So your parking officers, you can look at them and figure out on any given day, hey, how many cars did we scan on any given day and how many hits did we receive from the cars we scanned? That's at the top right. At the bottom left, what we do here is we can have a graphic interface that shows us the influx and the exiting of cars. So you could find out, you know, which parking lots are experiencing the most cars coming in, going out. You could further break down into understanding at what times of the day most people come in. Again, all of this is metadata that helps you as a parking authority or as a parking manager understand what's going on, so you could take better decisions for your parking system. Here we have two graphs that are showing for two different lots, the blue one and the green one are two different lots, and we're showing the occupancy in real time versus the violation rate in real time. Again, excellent metadata that you get to study and digest, so you could take the proper decisions, not only in terms of, hey, when do I need to send someone out, but man, this lot is always at 100%, we might need to expand it or move people to another lot. That's some of the metadata on how it can look like. You can have it as numbers, or you can have it as pie charts that kind of give you a quick glance on just quickly looking at it to understand what's going on. We talked a lot about the metadata. I know very often people talk about big data. This is an example I love to talk about. I'm going to coin the phrase, it's small data. When we implemented a Freefall system at a major university campus, I was very involved in this one particular deployment, and I was studying the results on one car, and this is real data actually. The second car on top was actually kept disappearing from inventory. We'd see it come in, but we would never see it leave, and hence we were never charging that car properly. So I don't know if anybody could tell from the video. I know that it's a webinar, so maybe the resolution is not that great, but there's something different about that card that's in gray compared to the rest. I'll do a zoom in, and hopefully you'll notice it now, but essentially after studying this one car, I realized from the images, I said, oh, hold on a second, there's something off about it. All the other cars that are coming in from entrance 2, we see the back of the car, except for that one where we see the front of the car. So essentially, here's a zoom in of what was going on. The gentleman figured out, the gentleman figured out how to beat the system by essentially driving out from the entrance. And again, if we were just blindly reading plates and not giving some additional context to the images and what was going on, we wouldn't have caught this. And when we contacted the school, they were actually they were confirming that they had done some construction renovations in that area, and they had moved some of the barriers and bollards around, and that's what allowed this guy to escape. So they were able to make adjustments accordingly. Now, in this one case, you can actually take that plate, add it to a hot list the next day. As soon as he shows up, you can get an alert on your phone, and then you can either meet the guy if you really want to be confrontational, but more than likely what you can do is just put a note on his windshield saying, hey, please pay attention to leaving at the exit and whatnot. So that's it. I'm going to open up the floor now to questions and answers. Hopefully we got plenty of them. All right, so I'm gonna attempt to, if we can, we're gonna respond to all the questions possibly, but I don't know if that'll be possible. We're gonna try. So the first question I got is, how are people using the data that's collected to improve their parking operations? What are they tracking? Depending on the scenario, I think this was a question I think that came a little bit earlier, but I hope I covered some of those. But certainly the occupancy data, for example, is very relevant. Knowing where you're finding the most parking violations, I think, is very relevant. You know, if you're scanning cars all over the city and you're seeing more hits in one area versus another, that may draw your attention to perhaps you need to change the signage there. You know, and like I said, this came in early, so I think there was quite a bit of examples given on how that data is, I think, very pertinent. Next question is for carpools. When it comes down to the shared permit violation, does Genetec have a solution for which vehicles belong or doesn't belong? We currently require one of the two vehicles to display a scratch-off permit for the day or pay an app or a kiosk. So the way the solution works today is you associate multiple vehicles to a single permit, and if more than one vehicle is seen on campus or in the city, whatever the region you designate is, that's when we raise a permit violation. Up to recently, probably last year sometime, both those parked vehicles had to be detected by the same ALPR vehicle. That is no longer the case. We're able to have multiple vehicles now. So you could have more than one Genetec vehicle in a city, for example. If one Genetec vehicle spots one car at one end of the city and another Genetec vehicle spots the car at the other end of the city, you can still raise that shared violation. I hope that answers the question. Unfortunately, this isn't a conversation. I got to read the question, so hopefully I got it. I'm doing my best. Sometimes our LPR system reads plates wrong, which increases our violation rate. There has also been times where the LPR system identifies a violation for failure to pay, but the customer actually paid the kiosk or park mobile. Those are two very different issues, and I'd like to address them separately because they're both very important. It does happen that on occasion the ALPR system will read a plate incorrectly. This should not be happening very often, and we will be introducing a new and improved ALPR engine very, very soon, which I think will completely change the game. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there is a new ALPR engine that will be introduced that is a significant game changer. That will reduce the misreads significantly. However, there will always be misreads. No system, despite what anybody claims, and I've been in this business a long time, so I feel confident in making this claim, no system reads 100% of the plates properly. Sometimes you might have a trailer hitch in the way, you could have a bike rack in the way. There's going to be some cars that are either missed or misread. Hopefully that number is minimal. It should be minimal. If it's not, there might be something wrong. We have tools like things called fuzzy matching, which also help reduce the false hits even further. And at the end of the day, it should not be happening more than, you know, if you scan a few hundred cars, you should not have to stop maybe more than once or twice because you're having, you know, these false hits. And even then, you should be able to manually override them in the car. If this is happening too much, it takes away from the efficiency of the system. So if it really is a problem, I suggest you get in touch with your dealer to understand why that failure rate is so high, because that should not be happening. The other thing that was mentioned in this question is someone has paid and we're still issuing a ticket. If the system is installed correctly, there is a feature that we call the last chance lookup. And what this does is it can happen sometimes due to network latencies that I scan a car and the guy just paid for his parking maybe a few seconds before that. Essentially what happens is by the time the payment goes from the payment provider to the back end and we're advised, we can lose a little bit of time, and that latency might be enough time for me to give the person a ticket. But there is a system, there is something in the car, a feature called last chance lookup, and what that does is when it's configured, it will not give the officer the green light to issue a ticket until it's verified that in fact that person did not pay. So if that is enabled, it should be working, and if it's not working, we need to understand why, because it sounds like it may not be configured properly or not configured at all. But that should take care of any of the quote-unquote false hits. Next question. Is there a way to... That was the same question, sorry. So is there reporting available that can automatically send a list of violators on a daily basis? The answer is absolutely. You can do a read report or a hit report, and that information can be automatically emailed to anybody you want. Again, if you're having some questions with that, you can talk to your Genetec reseller, or you can even send in a question on GTAP, and we'll be happy to answer it. So the answer is yes, that can absolutely be done. Does Genetec handle permit management? We typically rely on our permit partners, be it the T2s of the world, AIMS, the New Parks of the world, the Cardinals. I'm sure I left someone out, BOSS, but essentially we rely on our partners. However, if you want to manage your own permit list, that is, maybe you're a condo complex or a gated community where you just have an Excel spreadsheet that doesn't change that much, and you're happy to update it once a day. We can ingest something from an Excel spreadsheet. I just use Excel spreadsheet as an example, but that's an easy one that I have seen some people use sometimes in a condo complex because it's not big and elaborate enough to have a very complex permitting system. But essentially, yes, you can go through Excel, manage your permits, and we will be able to ingest that. You just have to save the Excel file as what's called a CSV file, and yes, we can bring that in. Does fixed LPR camera send data to mobile LPR? So I talked a little bit about that example before. The way it works is the fixed camera will send it to Security Center, which is our backend, and our backend will in turn send it to the mobile LPR system. So yes, you can have a fixed camera system that detects the violators, and those violators are automatically sent to the mobile LPR system. So as he drives around, he will pick them up, no problem. I don't understand the next question. Keeping accounting in, okay, it was separated by another question. This one is asking if the Genetec system can keep accounting, invoicing, accepting payments. The answer to that is no. We typically rely on our ticketing partners to take care of that stuff, and there's an abundance of ticketing partners, and if there's one of them whose name wasn't on the list, please let us know. We're happy to work with everybody. We pretty much have integrations with I don't want to say all because I don't know about all the players, but pretty much most of the ones that we're aware of, integrations are in place, and we're always very open to doing more of these integrations. Does your system work with third-party CCTV systems? Our system is a what we call a VMS system, a video management system. I don't know how you would want us to work with a third-party CCTV system, but what I can tell you is if you do have cameras, you could probably repurpose those cameras into the existing security center system that you're using now. From a security standpoint, how do you feel this would apply in a school campus situation? This is an excellent question. I often give presentations. I'm a bit of a parking nerd, so my life tends to revolve around parking and LPR. However, the security center system is a fully decked out, actually, I mean, this is debatable, and I realize this is coming from a vendor, but if you look at most industry studies, the Genetec system is the world's most advanced security system. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed with that, because the reality is you can only use it for LPR and parking, and that's great. And you can slowly add components on. So I often give the analogy that it's kind of like Microsoft Word. You can start using Word, and later on you might want to start using PowerPoint, and later on you might want to start using Excel. Think of Security Center as that part. More often than not, the people on this call will probably just start off with the parking aspects. And once you're comfortable with the parking, that same interface, that same screen, and I showed some examples before, can be used to do security as well. If I actually go, can you go up to the slide? Oh, sorry. Yeah, like for example, here. In this case, this is clearly a parking application, and this, by the way, is a real live screenshot of what Security Center could do, and there's different tabs on top, and you can have a different tab for different lots or whatever it is, but what we're doing here is we're actually monitoring the cars coming in on the top right to find out whether or not they've paid for parking or have a permit. We're monitoring the occupancy and the violation rate in the bottom right corner, and then we have video cameras at the bottom of the screen that are actually showing us what's going on in that parking lot live. And this is just one example of one parking lot, but you could have multiple monitors on a screen, and it could be tied into access control systems and whatnot. So I don't want to make this into a security center pitch, but I really do believe that this can be part of a very well thought out security system for a campus or anything for that matter. Our systems are used in many universities and cities all over the world and all over the US certainly. For paid parking, can you add a validation? So I'm not sure I understand this one, but absolutely. What we do is we work with our parking providers. So whether it's pay by phone, pay stations, or permit type companies, what we do is we tie in with them real time. So if they validate the parking, that information gets sent over to us real time, and we make sure we don't stop or hit on the vehicle. And if we do, like I mentioned before, there's a last chance lookup that makes sure that the guy is cleared. So if I happen to hit on his car right when he gets his parking validated, before I give the officer the green light to issue the ticket, I will do a last chance and a check, and I will be able to validate that. I don't understand that question. Someone asked, what is the ALPR read rate? This is an excellent question. I've been dealing with this for years, and I'll tell you something, being in the ALPR industry, it's very frustrating because there's many providers which claim they do 100%, and I can say with an absolutely clear conscience, I don't believe that's accurate for anybody to make that claim. And it's important to understand the background of where this comes from. First of all, as a general statement, if you would have asked me this a few months ago, I would say in general, a perfect read rate, which means I read the car absolutely perfectly without a single mistake, we tend to say that's in the low to mid 90s is what you should expect. And then we have some technology called fuzzy matching, which effectively brings that rate up to 98, 99% in the upper 90s. Anybody who tells you they're reading at 100%, I would ask them to, I would challenge them, and I would ask them to prove it. In fact, any LPR provider should be able to give you a demonstration of how good their technology is. And I don't excuse myself from that challenge. So if you feel that's something you're looking to invest in, whether it's Genetec or anybody else, I would encourage you to ask them to try it. Having said that, Genetec will be announcing very shortly a new ALPR engine. We've been working on this very put a lot of effort into this for the last few years, and it's geared very much around the parking enforcement world. And that number that I mentioned before, which is in the low 90s and effectively bringing it up to the upper 90s, essentially will now go from the upper 90s to, I don't want to say 100% because nothing's ever 100%, but it will be a significant increase in the quality and the precision of the reads. The beta tests that we've done up to now are extremely encouraging. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I could tell you that in all the time I've done this, I've never given an exact number because it changes. Because you could be reading at 95 one day, and then there's a snowstorm the next day, and it goes down to 91, and then the next day you're doing your reads at night, and the weather conditions or the lot that you chose might make it go up. So it's anybody who gives you an exact number, certainly someone who tells you it's at 100%, I would certainly be very skeptical about that. There are, I would say, two categories of, okay, so now I'm getting off topic, but in my mind, there's two categories of players. There's serious players in LPR, and I would say the people who maybe don't invest as much in it. And certainly, I believe that we're in an elite category of ALPR providers, and I think that's a reasonable number. And anybody who claims that they're doing in that number, like in the 90s, I would certainly ask them to give it a test or try it. I think a trial is something I would encourage. What programs? So there's, hold on, I'm just trying to move this down. I can't move it. How can we get in touch or have someone contact our company, because we are very interested in putting a system together? Someone will get back to you. There's certainly a number, and we'll make sure we send that out. What do you suggest when there are no plates, temporary plates, etc.? Most LPR systems, and certainly ours, will allow you to do a manual entry. So if you do have a temporary plate, unfortunately, you're going to have to enter it by hand. That's one way to do it. But one thing I do want to draw attention on ALPR, as I mentioned before, is a force multiplier. So as opposed to, maybe doing 30 cars manually one at a time, you can now do 300 cars in the same amount of time, because we're talking about potentially 5 to 9 times more gain in territory. If you miss 1 or 2 cars, I'm not saying that's good, but you have to keep in mind that those 1 or 2 cars that you missed may very well have paid for parking, or maybe they haven't, but the idea is not every car you missed is a violator. And the reality is you're gaining so much more ground that, yeah, you might miss 1 or 2 that have a temporary plate. You can stop and enter them manually. You may want to do the calculations, however, to see if that's really worth your while. If you see the same guy with the same temporary plate for 2 months and you recognize that it's always the blue Focus that has a temporary plate, you might want to stop and check that out. But if you look at an overall gain in efficiency, it may not be worth stopping for those obscure or exceptional plates. But then again, it's something you can do. The technology does allow you to do it. Someone's asking me what the detection rate is in Australia. It's no different than it is in North America. For us anyways, we read plates very well in Australia as we do here. And anyone who's not getting read rates, in the 90s as I've described, I encourage you to get in touch with your Genetec dealer to understand what's going on. It could be something as simple as something's misconfigured or misaligned. We do see, you may see sometimes that all of a sudden you're not reading well, like you've been reading really well for months and then all of a sudden it's not going well. It could be someone banged into the camera, or the camera somehow lost alignment. But generally speaking, like I said, in the 90s is where you should expect to be. Oh, hang on, I'm being told, I'm being muzzled. Hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood the question. I was corrected. I guess someone was asking what they did in the one case where the guy was driving out from the entrance. My understanding was that situation occurred because they had rearranged the bollards, or they had moved them around, and that was corrected. So I guess they made it harder for someone to sneak out or drive out of the entrance by moving the bollards or the barriers around. Is this system available in the Middle East region? The Middle East is a really big region, and it depends where you're talking about. We do read plates in the Middle East, but for that I would have to get more details on the project. I would encourage whoever asked that question to maybe get in touch with your Genetec dealer to understand what it is. I don't want to give a blanket answer and say yes, because we do read plates in the Middle East, but there are many countries and many different jurisdictions, and not all the plates are the same. Someone asked if the technology comes in a handheld unit. At this time, our technology is not licensable on a handheld unit. That may change in the future. At this time, it is not. Someone asked if we could receive the presentation. I do believe we're giving out the presentation afterwards. Someone is asking, what is your accuracy at night? The accuracy at night, this is very counterintuitive, but we actually read license plates better at night than we do during the day. That doesn't seem to make sense, but it actually doesn't. The reason why it's like that is because we see a lot more during the day, and we need to figure out what a license plate is and what's I don't know, a fence or bushes. So there's a lot more processing power that's required. At nighttime, the plates tend to light up very much, and everything else tends to stay dark. So it's a lot easier of a challenge to read plates at night. So we tend to read a little bit better at night than we do during the day, and the numbers are no different than what I mentioned before. How do you deal with mismatch recognition? Well, it says mismatch, but I think they mean mismatch. We do have fuzzy matching technology, and that is entirely configurable. It is a very, very, very effective tool at making sure your process goes very quickly. I don't want to get into too much on how you configure that, because there are several different parameters, but essentially over the years we've learned quite a few tricks of the trade, if you will, on how to make sure you don't get too many false hits, and that's what our fuzzy matching technology is. If for those of you who already have the Genetec system, you can look it up in the manual or ask your dealer for some help, but there's a good chance it probably is deployed already. And if you're getting too many false hits, then you need to let us know, because that is not normal. Can you assign more than one vehicle to a permit, so if either vehicle enter a ramp, they will be let in? You can assign more than one you can have multiple vehicles sharing the same permit. That kind of goes along the carpool sharing type mentality that I mentioned before. So the answer is yes, you can. Someone's asking if 5.6 SR4 has the graphic interface available. No. It starts in 5.7. So those fancy graphs that you're seeing, that's in 5.7. If you have a valid SMA, you are entitled to that upgrade of software. Yeah, a lot of that's a good point, actually. A lot of the graphs that you're seeing now are new features that we've added in 5.7. We're constantly improving our software, and this is just one of the improvements that I guess I'm showing off here. So hopefully I don't make anybody feel too bad if they don't have the latest, but of course you're entitled to it. Someone asked if a vehicle is staying more than 24 hours, can we raise an alarm? Absolutely. So our Freefall technology, it's funny, in different parts of the world, they use it for different reasons, and I'll tell a story about how we use this in Europe, which I think is interesting. It's pertinent to that question. Parking is a lot more scarce in certain cities in Europe. If I think about Paris in particular, so what employees often do is if they're going away for 2 weeks, they will take their car, drop it off at work, as if they're going to work, and just leave it there for 2 weeks. It may not be something you'd want to do in North America necessarily, but in Europe, that parking space is gold, so they take advantage of it. And employers want to know if that's the case. So you can actually monitor the parking lot, and anything that's been there for over 6 days or over 1 day, whatever, you set the timers, you can be advised. And this is also very interesting for cars that could be potentially stolen, because someone might take a car, bring it for a joyride, and then drop it off in your parking lot. So you may want to know about this, and it's just a list of vehicles of interest, I guess, that you can generate. Someone's asking how the grace period is configured and where. This is for specifically when I talked about it there, I was talking about free flow, so fixed cameras. We also have a grace period available for time limit violations as well as some permit violations. Depending on where you're looking, it's configured in different places. If you're talking about mobile, it's configured in the pay-by-plate sync module. If you're talking about fixed, it's configured in the free flow module. If you need more specific questions, feel free to contact your Genetec reseller, or you can contact us directly on GTAP. Someone's asking if our cameras read just the plate or if we read the color of the car, the length of the car, the body type, etc. At this point, we focus on the plate. We also have the ability to read state and the make of the car. The reliability of the plate is greater than the other metrics that I just mentioned. That's the most important one for parking. Our solution is very, very much parking focused. But those other metrics, those other analytics are there, and we continue to improve them. But I don't want to give the impression that the color of the car or the model of the car is as reliable as the license plate. So how can we expect the car-mounted cameras and LPR hardware to last and be effective? Additionally, is there some software updates? Will those depend on the hardware of the vehicle? Oh, sorry, I missed it. How long can we expect the car-mounted cameras and the hardware to last? Okay, so this is an interesting question. You can buy additional warranty for up to 5 years. So we will warranty the cameras for up to 5 years depending on the options you choose. Does that mean we expect the cameras to disintegrate after 5 years? Absolutely not. One of the challenges we face is the same challenge that any electronics manufacturer faces, whether it's Apple, Dell, or anybody else. When you manufacture components, the components may not always be available. So there's a certain liability with warranting stuff for over 5 years because we may not have the components to service that thing in 5 years. But I can tell you that we do have customers today, because we've been in the business for close to 20 years. We do have customers today that have systems that have been out in the field for over 10 years. We often beg them to please take them down, and we offer sometimes trade-in programs because we're not comfortable with the risk of a 10-year-old product breaking down, and then we have to try and figure out how to fix it because the customer might be in a jam. So we try and get them to upgrade, but a reasonable lifetime to plan for, I think, is 5 years. And then after that, you can keep it and hang on to it, but there might be some risk in getting it repaired if it does in fact break down. And is there software updates? Absolutely, there's software updates. Then there's how often do you hear of issues in areas where there are winters? For those of you who are not aware, the primary R&D for these cameras is done in Montreal, Quebec. We have a very good understanding of what a harsh winter is. We get a lot of snow, a lot of ice. We dump tons of salt. So does a hard winter or a snowstorm affect read capability? Yes, it does. I think we fare extremely well just because of the nature of where we design and build these things. And the reality is, like, if you just got dumped on with 2 feet of snow, I don't know if you can even see the license plate, because if there's a little igloo sitting on the rear bumper, you're not going to see anything. But once the car drives around and you know, people have dusted off their bumpers, the plates do not look nice. They look gray. They're all washed out, but we still tend to read them regardless.
Just to add on that, we do have a case study from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse that deals a lot with the issue of snow-covered plates and how they overcame that with their ALPR system. You can find that on our website.
Thank you, Charles. Can ALPR that's currently set to track 2-hour parking, can it be switched to track scofflaws throughout the city rather than tracking timing? Not only can it be set to track scofflaws, it can be set to simultaneously track timing for time limit and doing scofflaws. So the example I gave before, which is the extreme example, but we were doing permit tracking, we were doing time limit tracking, and we were doing scofflaw tracking all at the same time simultaneously. You don't have to do that. You could set it to do one or the other, but absolutely the answer, yes, you can. Okay, so someone's asking a question about the example I gave for special events parking. How might one on a cell phone be notified of the permit type allowed to park? The individual need to locate a base station to verify. So the example I gave is we're essentially dynamically changing parking rights, whether it's because there's an event scheduled or there's sudden construction. The point I was trying to make was you can change them. In fact, now how you would go about advising people, that's a different scenario. You might have some digital signage that you might want to drive. You might be able to send people, if there's some sort of campus-wide communication method. Unfortunately, I think the most effective thing, and this is not going to sound very sophisticated coming from someone who's representing a technology company, but if there's a sudden change at a parking lot, you may just want to put a big poster board or something like that saying, unexpected construction, please, if you have red permits can now can park in lot B today, or something along those lines. I think it's a little bit different though when you're talking about a special event like the big football game. There you might have a website that's driving people, and it says, hey, if you bought your tickets, you can click here and reserve your parking ahead of time, or click here to register to park on campus, and that becomes much more of a proactive thing versus a reactive thing. I hope I answered that question. I think I understood that question, and hopefully that's a good answer. So someone asks, can fixed LPR camera free flow track vehicles by time restriction access or day restriction access? So the answer is yes, it can. It's hard for me to give a blanket answer. The short answer is yes, it can. There might be some weird scenario that you have that's problematic, but in general, yes, it can. A lot of that depends on who your permit provider is and if we have an integration in place. As a generic answer, I'm going to say yes. If there's a specific scenario you'd like to discuss, by all means get a hold of your Genetec rep. But the short answer is yes, we can, and I'm aware of some that we have done that with. How long is the scanned license plate data available? Months later, campus police, I am at a university, want to know if a given person was spotted anywhere. Okay, so this is a very good question. This all depends on the policies you want to set. You can set everything to be, flush it after 24 hours. And we also make the distinction between a vehicle that is red and a hit. So someone who's either a scofflaw or was parked, illegally. I think if I had to go kind of a rule of thumb, this is not an exact science, but I think most people tend to, what I've seen common theme is you tend to keep the hits for a year, and you tend to keep the reads for a month. Some people have it more, some people have it less. It's entirely configurable by you, the customer. But so the short answer is as long as you want it. But I think what I tend to see a lot is people have it for a month when it comes to hits, reads, and a year when it comes to hits. Campus security uses Linnell for video security monitoring. How can we integrate Genetec security? Keep Linnell as a vendor of choice for the balance of the security. I was going to say, in my mind, the fact that you're using Genetec ALPR, you're already using our system. That doesn't mean you have to do away with the Linnell system, but there's nothing preventing you from adding cameras. So you might have the parking lot cameras on your Genetec system, and Linnell can keep using the Linnell systems. One does not have to exclude the other. I was just trying to raise the point that you already have this system. It's already in front of the officers. They're already trained on it. Why bring in, if for those specific parking officers, why include a third party? Why include a different provider? If you already have a third provider, you could just install new Sony cameras and send the reads to them. What I was trying to emphasize was there's nothing, you already have the system in-house. There's nothing preventing you from adding cameras to it yourself.
Just to add to that as well, we do actually offer a plugin for Linnell. So if you had video and LPR with Genetec and wanted to keep Linnell for your access control, but wanted to see it all in one interface, you can connect the Linnell events to Security Center and see it all in the same interface.
Here's an interesting question. Someone's asking me where they're in a jurisdiction where they're expecting the license plate pattern to change soon. We will need to buy another LPR system after that. So generally speaking, we have a team of 5 individuals. All they do all day is learn how to crunch plates, and whenever there's a new plate, we tend to add it to the list, and it gets added to the overall, our internal jargon is the context, so the context of reading. But this has to be taken with a grain of salt. For example, in one community, they were raising, one of the ways they raised funds to get a professional sports franchise was to issue license plates with that sports franchise logo on it. Initially, it represented, less than 1% of the plates, but as momentum grew for this franchise, it started to represent 2 and 3% of the plates. At that point, Genetec does get involved. We do some sampling, and then we make sure that our system can read those plates. However, if there's a limited edition, I don't know, I love dogs plate or something like that, and you bring it to our attention, we need to look at the overall statistics. If it only represents 0.001% of the plates in your jurisdiction, yes, it represents a plate, but going back to what I was talking about before, in the overall picture, with the amount of plates that you're scanning, it does not represent a statistically significant amount of plates, so we may not make adjustments. Having said that, very often the new plates get read automatically, but the short answer to that question is we do have a team of dedicated individuals that are constantly analyzing, studying, and collecting data on new plates and adding that to the system. We don't have, someone's asking if we have LPR for smartphones. I talked a little bit about that before. We don't have that ability yet. We haven't made that available. It's not so much the ability, but we don't license that yet. How does the system communicate wirelessly? Does it use a SIM card? How does weather affect the system? So our systems do communicate wirelessly. Typically, it's usually with a SIM card. We do have some campuses which may have campus-wide Wi-Fi, and I've actually seen that in at least one city. So it doesn't really matter. It could be Wi-Fi, but typically the reliable method we use is either a 3G or 4G communication. The other question was, how does weather affect the system? I talked a little bit about snow, which is definitely the worst of the two evils. When it rains, it can affect our read rate, but not substantially, not from what I've seen. We've done testing in the most horrible downpours that we've ever seen, and it's actually remarkable. You can't even make the plate out with the human eye, and the system can. I don't want to make it seem like the system sees better than us. In some cases it does. But generally speaking, weather is not an issue. Like I said, if you just got dumped on by a foot of snow and everything looks like an igloo, we're not going to read the plate, not because it's dirty or anything, just because it's physically obstructed by a mountain of snow. But when people tend to brush off their cars, It's fine. Charles, is that? So guys, thank you very much. I hope I got all the questions. I tried to scan through them. There were some of them I may have skipped intentionally because they seemed like the same question. Someone is asking about plates in the Middle East, but again, that one I'd like to take it offline. And I think I got them all. If I did forget them, feel free to send another question, or if I missed it, resend the question. I apologize for that. It wasn't intentional. I'm trying to follow a little grid, a tiny little screen with questions, so I'm doing the best I can. But if I did forget one, please resend it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chris. So we'll be closing up the webinar now. I'm very thankful for everyone who was able to stay on the line, but we will do a recap of all these questions and send them out with the answers and the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation. Keep your eyes out for additional webinars coming to you throughout the summer. If you enjoyed this one, we'll be sending some out roughly on a monthly basis. So thanks again, everyone, and have yourselves a great day and a great week.